Hey, old man, learn to move when you see your betters coming through. The voice sliced through the calm morning air, sharp and arrogant. A wave of cold, gritty water hit me, soaking my khaki uniform from chest to knee. He was laughing as he sped past in his golf cart, a sound like grinding glass. Some people just don't know their place. Guess that's what $100 a day gets you. He didn't know that the man he just humiliated owned the very ground under his expensive Italian shoes and was about to make a call that would cost him millions. My name is Arthur Pendleton, and for the last 15 years, most people here have only known me as the head groundskeeper. At 72, my hands are gnarled, and my face is a roadmap of my years under the California sun. I wear this simple uniform, I drive a beat-up pickup truck, and I spend my days with the soil. They see an old man who trims the greens and replaces the divots at the Pebble Beach golf links. They don't see the man who founded it. I built this place with my father, brick by brick, blade of grass by blade of grass, 50 years ago. We carved it out of the stunning coastline, believing it should be a sanctuary of respect for the game and for nature. We weren't just building a club, we were building a legacy. Years ago, after my father passed, I sold a controlling interest to a corporate board. It was a decision made with a heavy heart to ensure the club's financial future. But I kept two things: a permanent non-voting seat on that board and, more importantly, I retained personal ownership of the land itself, the entire $120 million parcel. The board manages the business, but they are, in effect, my tenants. This is a detail lost to time. The current management team is new, brought in from the East Coast. They see my name on some old documents, but they assume I'm just a quiet, retired founder who likes to potter around. They let me keep my old job as head groundskeeper out of a sense of patronizing respect. They have no idea I signed their lease renewal. To the members, especially the new ones, I am completely invisible, a piece of the scenery, and I preferred it that way. It allowed me to see the true soul of my club, to watch the sun rise over the 18th hole, to feel the morning mist from the Pacific on my face, to know that the heart of what my father and I built was still beating. I saw the good in people, the quiet reverence some had for the course, the friendships forged between putts. But lately I'd been seeing more of the other kind, the kind of man who saw the club not as a community, but as a stage for his own importance, the kind of man like Chadwick Vance. Chadwick had joined about 6 months ago. He was new money, and he wanted everyone to know it. Everything about him was loud, the bright brand name polo shirts that were always one size too tight, the booming voice he used on his phone, discussing deals in a way that ensured everyone in the clubhouse could hear, the way he'd revved the engine of his Porsche Cayenne in the parking lot as if it were a trophy. He treated the staff like they were servants in a medieval court. He'd snap his fingers at the waitstaff, complain if his steak was medium instead of medium rare, and he had a particularly nasty habit of belittling anyone he deemed beneath him. And from day one, he had deemed me far, far beneath him. I was just the old man on the mower, the ghost who appeared at dawn to fix the damage from the day before. He never made eye contact. He'd walk right past me without a word, sometimes tossing a cigar butt onto a pristine green I had just manicured, forcing me to walk over and pick it up as he watched with a smirk. It was a small, silent power play, and he enjoyed it immensely. My staff knew, of course. Not the whole truth, but they knew I was more than I seemed. They knew my last name was Pendleton, the same name on the bronze plaque by the entrance. They were loyal, hard-working people, and they treated me with a quiet deference that confused the members who witnessed it. Chadwick probably assumed they were just being kind to the elderly. That morning, the incident happened on the 9th hole. It's my favorite spot on the entire course. It sits right on the cliff's edge, and on a clear day, you can see the sea otters playing in the kelp beds below. A light rain had fallen overnight, leaving the cart path dotted with shallow puddles that shimmered in the rising sun. I was on my knees, carefully repairing a ball mark near the bunker, feeling the familiar satisfaction of making something perfect again. I heard his voice before I saw him. He was with 2 other men, guests he was clearly trying to impress. He was bragging about his new PXG driver, how it had added 30 yards to his drive. His voice carried across the green, an unwelcome intrusion on the morning's peace. I glanced up just as his cart made the turn onto the path beside the green. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw him register me, then his eyes flicked down to the large puddle of muddy water that sat directly between us. A cruel, deliberate thought flashed across his face. He saw an opportunity. He wasn't just going to drive past me. He was going to make a statement. I could have jumped back. I had a second, maybe two, to scramble out of the way. But something inside me, a stubborn pride that had been worn down but never broken, held me in place. I would not be chased off my own land by a man like this. I stayed on my knees, my trowel in my hand, and watched him. He smirked, then deliberately yanked the steering wheel. The electric cart veered sharply, hitting the puddle at full speed. The splash was like a physical blow. A sheet of cold, brown water erupted, drenching the entire front of my body. It soaked through my shirt and pants, plastering them to my skin. Muddy droplets spattered my face and hair. For a moment, I was just stunned, the shock of the cold and the sheer audacity of the act leaving me breathless. Then came the laughter, not just from Chadwick, but from his guests too. It was a harsh, braying sound that echoed across the quiet green. That's when he shouted the words. "Hey, old man, learn to move when you see your betters coming through." He didn't even slow down. The cart sped away, leaving me kneeling there, dripping and humiliated. "Some people just don't know their place," he called back over his shoulder. "Guess that's what $100 a day gets you." I stayed there for a long time, the water seeping into my bones. It wasn't the mud or the wet clothes that bothered me. It was the public spectacle. A few other members on the nearby fairway had seen the whole thing. They glanced over, then quickly looked away, pretending they hadn't noticed. Their silence was its own kind of condemnation. In their world, a man like Chadwick Vance was a winner, and I was just an obstacle he had driven through. Slowly, I got to my feet. My knees ached. I looked down at myself, at the brown streaks staining the uniform I took such pride in keeping clean. My hands were caked in mud. As I wiped them on my trousers, I felt the familiar weight on my left wrist. I pushed back the soiled cuff of my shirt. There it was, my father's watch, a 1968 Rolex Submariner, given to me on my 21st birthday. Its steel was worn, its face held 100 tiny scratches, each one a memory. It was subtle, not flashy like the diamond-encrusted monstrosities some of the new members wore. It was a tool, a piece of my history. And now, it was splattered with mud. Chadwick's mud. Something shifted inside me then. The sadness I felt for what my club was becoming hardened into a cold, clear resolve. This wasn't just about a rude member anymore. This was a violation. Chadwick hadn't just splashed a groundskeeper. He had, in his ignorance, desecrated a legacy. He had shown the ultimate contempt for the very ground that gave him his privilege. I walked away from the 9th green, my boots squelching with every step. I didn't head for the staff locker room to change. I walked directly toward the main clubhouse, leaving a trail of muddy footprints on the perfectly paved stone path. I ignored the stares and the whispers. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't just the groundskeeper. I was Arthur Pendleton, and I was about to remind everyone what that name meant. My boots made a sound I'd never heard on these stone paths before. A wet, sloppy squelch that announced my presence with every step. I was leaving a trail of muddy footprints across the immaculate terracotta tiles that led to the clubhouse entrance. Each mark was a small act of rebellion, a stain on the perfect, sterile environment that men like Chadwick Vance believed they owned. Members milling about with their morning coffee stopped their conversations to stare. I saw the looks on their faces. Disgust, annoyance, confusion. Who was this filthy old man, and why was he defiling their sanctuary? They saw my uniform, the mud, and dismissed me instantly. I was a problem to be handled, a mess to be cleaned up. They didn't see the fury simmering beneath my calm expression. I reached the grand oak doors of the clubhouse and pushed one open. The air inside was cool and smelled of lemon polish and old leather. David, the concierge who had worked here for 20 years, was standing at his polished mahogany desk. He looked up, his professional smile faltering as he took in my appearance. His eyes widened, first in alarm at the mud, then in deep concern when he recognized me. "Arthur, my God, are you all right? What happened?" he asked, his voice low and urgent as he started to come around the desk. I held up a hand to stop him. "I'm fine, David. Just had a run-in with one of our newer members." A flicker of understanding and then anger crossed his face. He knew exactly who I meant without me saying a name. Chadwick's reputation among the staff was notorious. "Mr. Vance," he said, the name a curse on his lips. "Yes," I said quietly, "Mr. Vance." A few members nearby overheard David. They saw him, a man always impeccably formal, showing genuine deference to a muddy groundskeeper. They looked from him to me, a puzzle they couldn't solve. I ignored them and let my eyes sweep across the main lounge. And there he was. Chadwick was holding court at the bar, a glass of what looked like expensive scotch in his hand, even though it wasn't yet 10 in the morning. His two guests were laughing uproariously at something he just said. He was leaning against the bar, his posture exuding a smug satisfaction. He was reliving his triumph. "You should have seen it," Chadwick boomed, loud enough for half the room to hear. "The old fossil was just kneeling there like he was praying to a weed. I figured he needed a baptism." More laughter, harsh and ugly. I swear, the look on his face, it was like he was part of the landscape and was surprised when the weather changed, Chadwick continued, taking a sip of his drink. "These guys, they're invisible."
You could run one over with a BMW and he'd just apologize for getting a dent on the bumper. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. The urge to walk over there, to grab him by his ridiculously bright polo shirt and set him straight was immense. But that wasn't my way. My father taught me that true power is never loud. It's quiet, deliberate, and final. Yelling would just make me look like a crazy old man. It would give him another story to tell. Instead, I walked slowly, deliberately toward the other end of the bar, my muddy boots continuing their protest against the Persian rug that covered the floor. The bartender, a young woman named Maria, saw me coming. Her eyes were wide with shock, but she, like David, had been here long enough to know who I was. She immediately reached for a towel. "Mr. Pendleton," she whispered, her voice laced with concern, "let me get you cleaned up." "Just a glass of water, please, Maria," I said, my voice steady. Chadwick and his friends hadn't noticed me yet. They were too absorbed in their own amusement. I stood there, a muddy specter at the edge of their glittering world, and I listened. "Honestly, what does a guy like that even do with his life?" one of his guests asked. "Wake up, cut grass, go to sleep. Depressing." "He serves a purpose," Chadwick said with a grand wave of his hand. "His purpose is to make sure the place looks good for us. He's a tool, like my putter, and sometimes you gotta clean the mud off your tools." Just then, a woman glided up to their group. She was tall, impossibly thin, and her face was a mask of expensive cosmetic procedures. She wore a white Chanel tennis dress that looked like it had never seen a court. This was Tiffany Vance. On her arm, she carried an Hermes Birkin bag so bright and orange it hurt to look at. She kissed Chadwick's cheek, wrinkling her nose slightly.
"Darling, are you telling that story again? It's not that funny." "It's hilarious," Chadwick insisted. "It's about establishing boundaries, showing the help who's in charge." Tiffany just rolled her eyes and scanned the room, her gaze flicking past me without a hint of recognition. I was just a stain, an imperfection in her perfect morning. Maria placed the glass of water in front of me, along with a clean, folded bar towel. I nodded my thanks and picked up the towel. I didn't drink the water. Instead, I carefully, methodically, began to wipe the mud from my father's Rolex. I polished the crystal face, cleaned the grime from between the links of the steel band. It was a simple, quiet act, but for me, it was a declaration of war. I was reclaiming my dignity, one patient wipe at a time. My focus on the watch was so complete that I almost didn't notice Mr. Harrison, the new club manager, bustling into the lounge.
Harrison was a man in his late 40s, perpetually flustered, always trying to please the board and the high-paying members. He was a corporate man, obsessed with profit margins and marketing strategies. He had no soul for the game, no feel for the land. He saw me as a quaint relic, the club's founder-in-residence, a harmless old man he had to tolerate. He was carrying a large framed document and a smaller silver-framed photograph, heading towards an empty space on the wall near the fireplace. "David, can you give me a hand with this?" Harrison called out, his voice strained. "The board wants the founders display up before the anniversary gala next week." My head snapped up. The founders display. I knew what that was. The framed document was the original deed to the land, all 300 acres of prime California coastline, signed by my father and me. The photograph was of the two of us, standing on the undeveloped cliffside 50 years ago, our faces full of hope and determination. Chadwick finally noticed the commotion. His story was being interrupted.
He turned, an annoyed expression on his face, ready to complain about the noise. His eyes fell on Harrison, then on the display he was preparing. Then his gaze drifted across the room and landed on me. He saw the muddy groundskeeper. He saw the bartender treating me with respect. He saw the concierge hovering nearby, looking at me with concern. And he saw me, standing at his exclusive bar, calmly polishing a vintage Rolex Submariner like I owned the place. For the first time, a flicker of something other than arrogance crossed his face. It was confusion. The pieces weren't fitting together in his world. Why were the staff so deferential to this nobody? I placed the now gleaming watch back on my wrist and pushed the cuff of my muddy shirt down over it. I left the glass of water untouched on the bar. Taking a deep breath, I started walking away from the bar, my squelching boots once again announcing my every move. But I wasn't heading for the exit. I was walking directly toward Mr. Harrison. Chadwick watched me go, his mouth slightly agape. He couldn't hear what I was about to say, but he could see the impossible scene unfolding. The filthy old groundskeeper was approaching the club manager with an air of absolute authority. I reached Harrison, who was struggling to hang the heavy frame. He looked up, startled to see me so close and so dirty. "Arthur, goodness, what happened to you?" he asked, his voice a mixture of pity and professional annoyance at my appearance. I didn't answer his question. I just looked him straight in the eye, my voice low and clear, holding the weight of 50 years of history. "Mr. Harrison," I said calmly, "put that down. You and I need to have a talk in your office, immediately." Mr. Harrison blinked, his professional smile frozen on his face. He looked from my mud-caked uniform to my dead serious eyes, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his features. To him, I was an employee, a groundskeeper, stepping far outside his lane. The idea that I could command him was not just absurd, it was insulting. "Arthur," he said, forcing a condescendingly patient tone, "I'm in the middle of something quite important for the board. If you have an issue, a sprinkler head, a problem with payroll, please take it up with your direct supervisor. We have procedures." He tried to turn back to the wall, dismissing me. The lounge was silent now. Every eye was on us. Chadwick Vance watched from the bar, a smug, curious smirk on his face, clearly enjoying the sight of the manager putting the lowly groundskeeper back in his place. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. I simply said, "The procedures have changed, Mr. Harrison. My office or yours?" The way I said it, the lack of deference, the utter certainty in my tone, finally broke through his corporate armor. This wasn't a request. It was an order. He looked around the silent room, feeling the weight of dozens of staring members. A public confrontation with a dirty employee was not in his management playbook. Defeated by the sheer strangeness of the situation, he let out a frustrated sigh. "Fine," he snapped, his voice a harsh whisper. "My office, and this had better be important." He carefully leaned the heavy frame containing the bead against the wall next to the fireplace, placing the framed photo on the mantel above it. He shot me a glare that said, "You will regret this," and then turned on his heel, striding briskly toward the hallway that led to the administrative wing. I followed him. My boots continued their slow, rhythmic squelch on the pristine floors. It was a sound of disruption, a sound of the outside world invading this carefully curated bubble of wealth.
I could feel Chadwick's eyes boring into my back, his mind racing to understand what he was seeing. I didn't look back. Right now, he was just a symptom of the disease. Harrison was the one I needed to cure. We walked down a long, quiet corridor lined with oil paintings of past club presidents, men I had known, men who had shaken my father's hand. Harrison didn't speak. He was radiating anger and indignation. How dare I embarrass him in front of the members? He pushed open the door to his office and stood aside, waving me in with a gesture of theatrical impatience. His office was exactly what I expected. It was cold, impersonal, and expensive. A massive, dark wood desk dominated the room, with a high-backed leather chair that looked more like a throne. On the desk, a gleaming Mont Blanc pen set sat next to a stack of perfectly aligned financial reports. The walls were a sterile white, adorned with generic corporate art, and a single large photograph of Harrison shaking hands with a famous golfer. He closed the door behind us, the soft click shutting out the rest of the club. The air in the room was suddenly thick with tension. "All right, Pendleton," he started, walking around his desk to establish his authority on his side of the room. "You have 2 minutes to explain why you've dragged me in here and made a scene in my clubhouse, looking like you've been wrestling a pig." I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, watching him. I let him feel the awkwardness of being in a room with a man covered in filth. I was a physical reminder of the real world, of the earth and the mud that his entire fantasy was built upon. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and even. "Tell me, Mr. Harrison, when you took this job, did you read the club's charter? The original one?" He scoffed. "Of course not. I read the current corporate bylaws. I'm a businessman, Arthur, not a historian. I'm here to maximize revenue, not read dusty old documents." "That's a pity," I said, "because if you had, you might understand the unique nature of our lease agreement." He leaned forward, placing his hands on his desk. "The lease is with the Pendleton Trust."
The board handles that. It has nothing to do with you or the groundskeeping budget. Now, what is this about? I took a slow step forward, my muddy boots sinking slightly into the plush cream-colored carpet. I was intentionally marking his territory, just as Chadwick had marked mine. "That's where you're mistaken," I said softly. "The Pendleton Trust isn't some faceless entity, Mr. Harrison. It's me. I am the trust. The board members are my tenants. They pay me rent to operate a club on my land." Harrison stared at me. His face went through a rapid series of emotions. First, disbelief. Then a flicker of amusement, as if he thought I was a senile old man having a delusion. And finally, as he looked into my unwavering eyes, a dawning horror began to creep into his expression. He was connecting the dots, my last name, the deference from the long-term staff, the sheer audacity of my presence in his office. That's impossible," he stammered, his bravado crumbling. You're the groundskeeper." "It's a job I enjoy," I replied. "It keeps me connected to what my father and I built. But my job title doesn't change the name on the deed you were just about to hang on the wall." He sank into his leather throne, his face pale. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. He was no longer the manager dealing with a problematic employee. He was a tenant who had just been called into his landlord's office. I had no idea," he whispered, looking at my muddy clothes with new eyes. He was finally seeing me. "The board, they never said." "The board likes their autonomy," I said, "and I've always preferred my privacy. It allowed me to see things as they really are. And what I've been seeing lately, I don't like it." I let that hang in the air. His mind was surely racing, replaying every interaction he'd ever had with me, every time he'd patronized me or dismissed my opinion on the course conditions. "Today," I continued, "a member named Chadwick Vance deliberately drove his golf cart through a puddle to soak me with mud. He did it in front of his guests, for their amusement. He called me an old fossil and said I didn't know my place." Harrison visibly flinched.
The color drained completely from his face. "Mr. Vance is a very high net worth individual," he said weakly, falling back on the only metric he understood. His initiation fee alone was substantial. "I don't care if his net worth rivals the national debt of a small country," I said, my voice hardening for the first time. He showed a fundamental lack of character and decency. He disrespected not just me, but the spirit of this club, the spirit my father and I founded it on. This isn't a playground for arrogant bullies, Mr. Harrison. It's supposed to be a haven for ladies and gentlemen. I walked closer to his desk, leaning my hands on the polished wood, ignoring the mud I was smearing on its surface. "This rot," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "It starts when management values a man's bank account more than his character. It festers when the staff is taught to tolerate abuse because a member pays a high fee. It ends with men like Vance believing they are untouchable kings." Harrison was speechless. He could only nod, his eyes wide with fear and regret. He understood now that his job, his career, was hanging by a thread, and the thread was in my muddy hand. "Before we discuss your future here, we are going to deal with Mr. Vance," I stated. "I want you to bring me his complete membership file, application, references, financial disclosures, everything." "Of course, Mr. Pendleton, right away," he stammered, scrambling from his chair and rushing to a filing cabinet as if his life depended on it.
As he fumbled with the keys, my mind was a whirlwind. This was not who I wanted to be. I hated this. I hated wielding power, hated the fear I saw in Harrison's eyes. I just wanted to tend to my grass, to feel the sun on my back, to honor my father's memory in peace. But my silence had allowed this cancer to grow. My desire to remain invisible had created a vacuum of leadership that men like Harrison and Vance were all too happy to fill with their greed and arrogance. This wasn't just about one act of humiliation, it was about taking back the soul of my club. Harrison returned with a thick file and placed it on the desk in front of me, as if it were a holy relic. I pulled up a visitor's chair, the legs sinking into the carpet, and opened the folder. I scanned the pages. The numbers were staggering. Stocks, real estate, a portfolio that ran into the hundreds of millions. I saw the references from other exclusive clubs, the list of corporate boards he sat on. And then I saw the section on charity donations, something the club prided itself on. For the upcoming gala's auction, he had pledged a significant item. It was a new Audemars Piguet watch, a showy piece designed to draw attention. It was a purchase made for prestige, a donation made for applause. I closed the file. It told me everything I already knew. Chadwick Vance was a man built of surfaces, with nothing of substance underneath. I looked up at Harrison, who was standing by the desk, wringing his hands. "I want you to do 2 things for me right now," I said, my voice cold and precise. "First, you will go out to the lounge. You will hang that deed and that photograph on the wall where you intended. Make sure it is polished and perfectly lit. Second, I want you to find Mr. Vance. You will tell him, very politely, that Mr. Pendleton would like to have a word with him. Here."
"In your office." Harrison scurried out of the office like a man who'd just been told his house was on fire. I heard his footsteps hurrying down the hall, his voice a low, urgent murmur as he spoke to David at the concierge desk. I stayed seated in the visitor's chair, the cheap fabric a stark contrast to the plush luxury of the room. The mud on my clothes had started to dry, turning stiff and crusty. It felt like a shell, an armor I had worn into battle. I looked at the muddy smear my hand had left on Harrison's desk. It was an ugly, chaotic mark on a surface of polished perfection. It was me. I was the disrection, the flaw in their perfect system. For years I had blended in, kept my head down, and allowed the club to evolve into something my father would barely recognize, a place where a man's net worth was his only credential. My silence had been a form of consent. Today, that silence was broken. From down the hall, I heard the faint, distinct sound of a hammer tapping a nail into the wall. Once, twice. Harrison was following my first instruction. The display was going up. The deed, with its elegant old-world calligraphy and the weight of a $120 million valuation, was being placed for all to see. Next to it, the photo of me and my father, 2 young men with dirt under our fingernails and a dream in our eyes. It was a testament to a time when legacy was built, not bought. I waited. The silence in the office was absolute. I could hear the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the main lounge. Each tick felt like a countdown. I wasn't nervous. I felt a profound, almost sorrowful calm. There was no joy in this, no thrill of impending victory. There was only a grim sense of necessity, like a doctor about to perform a painful but life-saving surgery. After about 10 minutes, I heard voices approaching down the corridor.
One was Harrison's, high-pitched and servile. The other was Chadwick Vance's, booming with irritation. "For God's sake, Harrison, what is so blasted important?" Chadwick's voice echoed off the walls. "I was about to close a deal on the phone. This better not be about that groundskeeper's ridiculous complaint." The office door swung open. Harrison entered first, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He held the door open, avoiding my gaze, and gestured for Chadwick to enter. Chadwick strode in, his artificially tanned face flushed with anger. He had his phone in one hand, a sleek black Virtu that probably cost more than my truck. He stopped dead in the middle of the room when he saw me sitting there, still in my filthy uniform. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unalterated contempt. "You have got to be kidding me," he sneered. Not at me, but at Harrison. "You dragged me all the way from the bar for this? You're actually entertaining a complaint from this person?" He gestured vaguely in my direction as if I were a piece of furniture. I remained seated, my hands resting on my knees. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. "What's he gonna do, Harrison? Sue the club because he got a little wet?" Chadwick laughed, a short, ugly bark. "I'll write him a check for $100 for a new pair of pants. Is that what this is about? Are you trying to shake me down, old man?" Harrison looked like he was about to faint. "Mr. Vance, please," he stammered, wringing his hands. "Please what?" Chadwick snapped, turning his full attention on me. "Speak up. You got something to say, or are you just going to sit there covered in mud?" I finally spoke, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of the room. "I do have something to say, Mr. Vance. I'd like to understand your perspective on what happened at the 9th hole this morning." He was taken aback by my calm tone. He expected me to be angry or intimidated. He didn't know how to react to my composure. "My perspective?" he scoffed. "My perspective is that the help was in the way of a member's golf cart. The help got splashed. End of story. It's called a hierarchy. Maybe you should look it up." "I see," I said, nodding slowly. "So, in your view, your membership fee buys you the right to treat the staff with disrespect, to humiliate a man for your own entertainment." Chadwick took a step forward, his chest puffed out. It was a classic alpha male display, designed to intimidate. "It buys me the right to enjoy the course without being inconvenienced by obstacles. You were an obstacle. Now, if that's all, I have a multi-million-dollar deal to finalize." He turned to leave. "Did you happen to notice the new display Mr. Harrison just hung on the wall by the fireplace?" I asked, my voice stopping him in his tracks. He turned back, his face a canvas of confusion and impatience. "What? No. Why the hell I care about some new painting?" "It's not a painting," I said, my eyes never leaving his. "It's 2 items, a photograph and a legal document. The document is the original deed for this entire property, 300 acres of Pebble Beach coastline." A flicker of interest appeared in his eyes. Money, land, that was a language he understood. "So," he said. "And the photograph," I continued, ignoring his interruption, "is of the 2 men who founded this club 50 years ago. The men who signed that deed." "Get to the point, Pendleton," he snapped, using my name for the first time, the sound of it an insult on his tongue. He'd probably heard Harrison use it. I leaned forward slightly. "The point, Mr. Vance, is the name on that $120 million deed. The name of the man who owns the ground your Porsche is parked on, the lounge you drink in, and the green you defiled this morning. The name is Pendleton. Arthur Pendleton." I let the words hang in the silent room. Chadwick stared at me. His arrogant smirk remained, but it was frozen, a hollow shell. His brain was working, furiously trying to process the impossible information. He looked at my muddy clothes, then at my old, weathered face. He remembered the Rolex I was polishing at the bar. He remembered the strange deference the staff showed me. The pieces were swirling in his mind, refusing to fit into his neat, orderly world of rich and poor, powerful and weak. That's a good one," he stammered, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "Very funny.
You're trying to tell me you're... His voice trailed off as he looked desperately toward Harrison for confirmation, for a sign that this was all just an elaborate, insane joke. Harrison couldn't speak. He just gave a slight, terrified nod. And in that moment, Chadwick Vance shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving his spray tan looking like a cheap orange veneer on a statue of fear. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a raw, gaping panic. He looked back at me, and for the first time, he truly saw me. He wasn't looking at a groundskeeper anymore. He was looking at the man who held his entire, fragile world in the palm of his hand. I stood up slowly. The power dynamic in the room had physically inverted. I was now the one standing, and he seemed to shrink, to become smaller. "This club," I said, my voice resonating with the quiet authority he had mistaken for weakness, was founded on the principles of sportsmanship, integrity, and mutual respect. It is a code of conduct, Mr. Vance, not a suggestion. It applies to everyone, regardless of the car they drive or the size of their bank account. You violated that code in the most vulgar and public way imaginable. I turned to the trembling club manager. "Mr. Harrison?" "Yes, Mr. Pendleton," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You will process the immediate and permanent revocation of Mr. Vance's membership," I ordered.
A full refund of his initiation fee will be wired to his account by the end of business today. We are not keeping his money. We are rejecting his character. Chadwick finally found his voice, though it was a reedy, pathetic version of his earlier boom. "You can't do this. I'll sue you. I'll sue the club. You'll hear from my lawyers." "I'm sure I will," I said calmly. "Your lawyers can speak to my lawyers. They can review the club's bylaws, which give the ownership the absolute right to revoke any membership at any time for conduct deemed detrimental to the club's reputation. But what they won't be able to do, Mr. Vance, is change the name on the deed." I walked to the door and held it open. "Now please, leave my property." The finality of those two words, "my property," hit him like a physical blow. He was utterly defeated. He stumbled out of the office without another word, his face a mask of disbelief and humiliation. Harrison gestured for a security guard who had been waiting discreetly down the hall to escort him out. I stood in the doorway and watched him go. I saw his wife, Tiffany, see him being escorted out, her face a picture of confusion and horror as she clutched her Hermes bag. The dream was over. I turned back to Harrison, who was still standing by his desk, looking like he had just survived a shipwreck. "Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice softer now, "this club has lost its way. From this day forward, when we evaluate a new member, I want the first file you bring me to be their character references, not their financial statement. We are in the business of building a community, not just collecting fees. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mr. Pendleton," he said, his voice filled with a newfound, genuine respect. "Crystal clear." I nodded once, then left his office. I walked back through the main lounge, my muddy boots no longer making a sound in my own ears. The members who had stared at me with disgust before now looked at me with awe and fear. They had all seen the display. They knew. I walked past the photo of my father and me, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't done it for revenge. I had done it for him. I had done it for the soul of this place. I pushed open the grand oak doors and stepped back out into the clean, salt-tinged air, the sun warm on my face. And you? What would you have done in my place?